Hey guys, Heidi Preep here. I was getting really in my head about perfectly centering myself in this video. It takes so long for me to get directly in front of the fireplace, and then I know I'm still not in the right place. Whatever. Today we are doing another installment of the attachment styles series. So I'm going to be talking about anxious, avoidant, and fearful avoidant styles. We're not going to spend as much time on secure because they probably don't need this video as much as the other styles do. But we're going to be talking about a topic that all of the insecure styles really need some help with kind of inherently, because the way that they developed a relationship around this thing was not ideal, to say the least. And that thing is boundaries. So when we talk about boundaries, there are about a million different definitions we could go with, right? I think that boundaries mean something slightly different to each person, but they definitely mean something different to each attachment style. And so today we're going to do a little bit of unpacking when it comes to how each style looks at boundaries, what comes to mind when they think of the word boundaries, and why they have trouble setting them. Because there is one thing that all three insecure styles have in common when it comes to boundaries, in that unless they have consciously worked on it, they all have a somewhat unhealthy or underdeveloped relationship to boundary setting. Quick sidebar, by the way, I realized the other day that I never really talk in these videos about where my information comes from or what level of education I have in this field. So a lot of what I talk about with attachment styles is just stuff that I have been reading and consuming on my own time. I'm currently writing a book that has a portion to it that involves attachment style, so I've been doing a lot of research in the area and have been working on interviewing experts in the field. But I'm also a student of attachment theory, so I'm currently doing my master's degree in attachment theory and research. I am not the expert on this. There are wonderful experts out there like Gabor Mate, Dan Siegel, the OG attachment researchers, John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and those are the sources that you should be turning to if you want to learn more about this field. But that's just a little bit of background on my involvement in this field, and my knowledge base is only going to continue to grow. So a lot of these videos are just me talking out what I'm learning as I go, and the information will absolutely change and evolve as I continue to learn more. And that's a great thing. It should always be like that. And thank you guys for just being a part of that learning process with me. So, okay, boundaries. So I'm going to start with the anxiously attached style. I've noticed that anxious types seem to have the most conscious challenge with boundaries. And what I mean by that is that they have the most awareness of the three insecurely attached styles, of the fact that they need to be setting better boundaries, but then they really struggle with putting those boundaries in place and then enforcing them. And this actually makes total and complete sense because the anxiously attached style never learned proper self-regulation. So self-regulation is when we're able to calm ourselves down when we're upset, whether that means soothing our own anxieties, validating our own emotional experiences, or problem solving on our own. These are all really important tools that the anxiously attached person did not have properly modeled for them early on in life, so they never really learned how to do those things without someone else's help. So, as an adult, when the anxiously attached person feels an overwhelming emotion, they often feel kind of like they're on fire and they need someone to help them feel differently. And for some anxiously attached people, this only applies to certain emotions. So maybe they really struggle with anger and anxiety, but sadness, they feel okay with going off and self-soothing. Other anxiously attached people might feel like they can only feel happy in the presence of other people or in the presence of a partner. So this could be somewhat selective to some emotions, but generally when it comes to really strong, really overpowering emotions, anxiously attached people tend to experience difficulty with self-regulation. Now, what they do know how to do is co-regulation. Now, the anxiously attached style does have a very strong, very visceral awareness of their emotions, and that's actually a really good thing. When we get to the other styles, you'll see that having low emotional awareness can actually also really kick you in the butt. But when those strong emotions come up, what they really feel like they need unconsciously is mirroring. So they need to see their emotions expressed back to them by someone else. And if that someone else, whether it's their parent early on in life or their partner later in life, is unable to kind of meet them where they're at emotionally, show that they understand their feeling, and then help them kind of work through it, calm down, whatever it is, they will continue to feel more and more distressed and often make more and more bids to get their emotions seen by their partner. So maybe they approach their partner one time and try to explain their feeling, and then their partner doesn't respond to it because maybe they're dating someone who's avoidant, who has lower than average emotional awareness. And so they keep kind of turning the volume up in different ways. If they're not satisfied by a conversation, maybe they start feeling agitated and then they start picking a fight just to get that negative emotion mirrored back to them in whatever way they can. And again, this is largely unconscious. Now, what does this have to do with boundaries? Well, it gives the anxiously attached person a specific problem when it comes to setting boundaries, which is that boundaries are the things that we put around ourselves. Okay, they're the healthy emotional barriers that we put up so that we can self-regulate behind them. But the problem is that the anxiously attached person struggles with self-regulation. So if they have boundaries up, all of a sudden they don't know how to handle their own emotions. So the anxiously attached person has a tendency to set boundaries and then become emotionally dysregulated and immediately knock all of their own boundaries down, because what they need, which is regulation, is on the other side of their boundary. So there can be this kind of constant tug of war happening inside of the anxiously attached person, where they know they need to set boundaries because maybe someone's not treating them fairly. Maybe there is true injustice in their relationship. But they feel like they need that person in order to keep themselves emotionally okay. And sometimes the kind of workaround that they try to do is saying they're setting a boundary when what they're really setting is an expectation. So I've heard a lot of anxiously attached people in attachment groups that I frequent, in attachment webinars or seminars, whatever, talk about how they set this boundary that their partner always has to say "I love you" before they go to sleep, not realizing that that is not a boundary. That is an expectation, okay? So if it's something that someone else has to do, that is an expectation. A boundary is about something that you do, okay? If all of your boundaries are expectations, you will perpetually be disappointed because there is no way to enforce an expectation other than through controlling behaviors. And controlling behaviors are really not a good setup for a healthy relationship. So again, if your boundary is something that someone else has to do for it to stay in place, that is not a boundary. A boundary is something that you will do. So let's give an example here. Let's say you don't like the way that your partner is speaking to you. You don't like certain words that they use that are demeaning or insulting. An expectation would be, you have to stop speaking to me like that, right? That puts all of it in your partner's hands. A boundary would be, if you speak to me using that type of language, I will discontinue the conversation and walk away until we can return to the conversation in a calmer state of mind. Now, of course, this is going to feel very, very scary and difficult as an anxiously attached person, because in that state, you're probably very dysregulated. You need to feel your partner's love, or it feels like you need to feel your partner's love in order to be okay again. So it's going to be really hard to set that boundary and walk away until you learn to do some self-soothing. So no anxiously attached person wants to hear this, but the solution to your boundary setting problem actually does not lie with you learning to set better boundaries with other people. It lies with you learning to set better boundaries with yourself, okay? Once you can tell yourself things like, I will leave every single situation that I'm in which I'm being disrespected or spoken to unfairly. Once you can tell yourself, I will show up for myself, pay attention to my emotional experience, and learn how to soothe myself without the help of my partner or my parent or whoever it is who I need to put that boundary between. Until you can learn to make yourself okay within your own boundaries, it's going to be really, really hard to enforce them. And so that's where you need to start if you're anxiously attached. Start with setting better boundaries with yourself. So learning what the feeling in your body is of having a boundary violated, and then learning some self-soothing strategies to calm yourself down. Now, self-soothing is tricky for anxiously attached people. Why? Because you have that negative view of self. So when you're alone with yourself, all of a sudden you're flooded with these feelings of self-hatred, self-doubt, self-disgust. And the first step is learning how to change those feelings. So if you can't do this for yourself yet, I really recommend doing some inner child work. So when you do inner child work, you almost disembody yourself a little bit so that you see yourself as a child who you don't have that inherent sense of hatred towards, and you think about what that child needs. And this is something that I really recommend doing with either the help of a therapist or a support group. I recently discovered the support group Adult Children of Alcoholics, which deals not just with people who grew up in alcoholic homes, but people who grew up in homes where there is any sort of family dysfunction. And they approach inner parenting and inner child work in a really cool and robust way, and the groups are completely free. So that's a resource that you could check out, but it can be really, really helpful to start working on that relationship with yourself, developing that self-compassion so that when you're in those heated moments, you know that you can maintain your own boundaries because you can take care of yourself without knocking them down. And that's going to be the number one thing that anxiously attached people have to work on when it comes to setting boundaries, is learning how to be okay within the boundaries they have set. Now, avoidance, the kings and queens of thinking that they have great boundaries when what they are actually doing is avoiding people like the plague. So I am fearful avoidant who leans strongly dismissive avoidant, and for my whole life, I thought that I was like a pillar of boundary setting. I thought I have great boundaries. I'm really good at attending to my own needs. It doesn't bother me if I let someone down. I'm okay with other people being upset at me or not liking me. People can think whatever they want to think. I'm fine over here. And so there's no real reason to communicate my needs, wants, feelings, or experiences to other people. If I need some time to be alone and self-regulate, I'll just take it. And if that upsets other people, then they should learn how to deal with their own emotions. And that's kind of the dismissive avoidant mindset. So again, dismissive avoidance function under the pretense, I am okay, you are not okay. So they believe that it is their job to take care of themselves, and it is everyone else's job to take care of themselves. And if other people can't take care of themselves, that's not their problem. And just like the anxious style has a very strong visceral awareness of their emotions, the avoidant style has a very strong and persistent awareness of how to keep themselves okay and self-regulated. Okay, so both of these types are pretty good at one thing and completely lack awareness of the other thing. And when it comes to avoidant types, what they lack awareness about is the fact that they need to communicate their boundaries, or else they are not boundaries. They are just glorified ghosting protocols. Now, the dismissive avoidant, unlike the anxious style, is not naturally great at recognizing what they're feeling and what their needs are. So when what they need is to set a boundary, what they often experience emotionally is simply a feeling of extreme overwhelm, or maybe even judgment towards another person. Like, ooh, this person really needs to take care of their own emotions because they're putting a lot of them on me. And all of those emotions, that overwhelm, that distress, that judgment of others, is actually your brain as a dismissive avoidant trying to alert you to the need to set a boundary. And what you will naturally want to do is just slink away unnoticed, right? You want to just kind of check out, leave the other person to deal with their emotions, which you may have rightfully identified don't have that much to do with you. And then you want to retreat to take care of your own emotions. Now, the end part of this process is good. The middle part is a mess, okay? The middle part is the part where you can communicate to someone else, this is what's going wrong, this is what I'm uncomfortable with, this is what's not okay to me, and this is what I need to be different in order for me to re-engage with this situation. And then you are free to go and self-soothe, okay? That's what setting a boundary is. And the reason this is important is because if you do not set boundaries, you end up in the same situation with increasing intensity over and over and over again. And if you are a DA, you probably often do. So if someone tries to get your attention one time and you kind of ghost, back away, ignore, hope they deal with it, chances are they're going to try again later with increasing intensity because you never told them what your boundaries were. And doing so is hard work because for you to know what and where your boundaries are, you have to be aware of what emotions are coming up. And that's something that you have never really learned to do. So there will absolutely be work that you need to do in this area. Just like the anxious style needs to work on self-soothing, you need to work on sensitizing yourself to your emotional experience so that when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling stressed out, when you're feeling incapable of dealing with a situation because it's so emotionally loaded, you can speak up for yourself in the moment and explain your discomfort in a way that actually helps resolve the situation rather than just kicking the can down the road by backing out of it and hoping it takes care of itself. And I feel annoyed and overwhelmed is like layer 1 of your emotional experience, right? Layer 2 of your emotional experience is probably, I feel incapable of dealing with this level of emotionality. And that makes me feel uncomfortable, inadequate, scared, maybe. And maybe there's a need behind that. Maybe what you need is some time and space to think about what's happening and to decide what you want to do. And that's a need that you can communicate. Maybe what you need is for someone to actually ask some questions about what's going on in your head and to help you work through it and figure it out, whether that's the person standing in front of you or a friend who you can contact once you've taken that space that you need. But in order for you to start setting boundaries that actually work and solve the problem one time instead of returning to it over and over and over, you have to be willing to show up, recognize your own internal experience, and communicate it clearly to the other person or people involved. And a really good tool for learning to do this is nonviolent communication. So nonviolent communication, you can pick up a book on, you can go to, there's like a million training seminars on it. And what nonviolent communication is a system that helps you identify what's going on when you're in conflict and how to phrase it effectively. So it encourages you to go one step deeper than the feelings of annoyance or overwhelm and frustration and really pinpoint what's underneath those feelings, what need is being unmet, and how can you communicate that need in a way that the other person will actually respond effectively to. Because telling someone that their emotion is invalid or crazy or an overreaction, even if those things are true, and I'm going to give you some credit, they might be, is not going to get you the response you want. Okay, using a tool like nonviolent communication that can help you understand and then phrase what your wants and needs are is going to go a much, much longer way than just telling yourself that the entire conflict doesn't make any sense, so you should just bow out. Now, of course, there are situations where this works, but there are lots of situations where it doesn't work, especially any situation where you're going to have repeated contact with someone, whether that's a parent, a partner, a colleague, a boss. If you have repeated interactions with someone, all of the unresolved interactions that you slunk away from are going to constantly come back up in some form unless and until you learn to communicate around them. So your pathway to setting boundaries as a dismissive avoidant is actually the opposite of the anxious pathway. The anxious pathway involves learning to retreat and self-soothe. The avoidant pathway lies in showing up and learning to give your needs a voice. Every time I film an attachment video, I get through anxious and then avoidant, and then when it's fearful avoidant time, I need to go take a giant coffee and chug it before I can start talking, because it is such a big one every single time, and also just takes a long time to film these videos. But give me a moment here, I'm having my fearful avoidant coffee, and then we will chat about what you guys do. Okay, let's talk about the fearful avoidant. So fearful avoidant has a really interesting relationship to boundaries, which all the types do, but fearful avoidant in particular has the awareness of boundaries so deeply buried in their psyche, it is almost absurd. So what that means is that from a very young age, fearful avoidants tended to learn that in relationships, you are not supposed to have any boundaries. You're not supposed to have any of your own needs, any of your own feelings. You can only have those things if you deal with them on your own. Now, what that means is that when a fearful avoidant gets into a relationship, they believe it's time for me to have no boundaries. Okay? So they have this kind of discrepancy where when they are in avoidance mode, so often when they're on their own, when they're out of relationship, they think, now I can do whatever I want. I can tend to my own needs, I can do my own thing, I can avoid the people and situations that I don't want to get involved in. But when I'm in a relationship, I should, and the anxious style shares this belief, I should have no boundaries between me and the other person, and I should give them whatever they want from me whenever they want it from me so that I can get love in return. Now, where this differs from the anxious style is that the anxious style is going down that highway kind of full force, okay? So they believe the only way to get my needs met is to have them met by another person. So I have to full force pursue this other person and panic if it's not working out. The fearful avoidant driving down the same highway, the other person needs to fulfill my needs highway, but they have one eye on every single exit sign along the way because they believe if I take one of those exits, it will lead me directly to a place where I can go into avoidance mode and meet my own needs. So what you get when you're in a relationship as a fearful avoidant is this feeling that you must have no boundaries, you must constantly attend to your partner. However, if you are to leave the relationship, then you get to meet your own needs, then you get to self-soothe, then you get to do whatever you want. So fearful avoidants often have chronic fantasies about leaving their relationship. Now, this is different than the anxious style who might have fantasies about causing a big blow up where they threaten to leave their partner and then their partner chases after them and they go, wait, come back, I love you, right? The fearful avoidant has fantasies where they actually leave the relationship, never see their partner again, and live happily on their own or with someone else or whatever. And after a while, the fearful avoidant begins to really, truly believe these fantasies and think, I would be better off if I were on my own, because in my fantasies, I am so happy. I am not attending to another person's needs. I am not in conflict all the time. I'm living in a fun, independent, interesting way. And then they start to blame the relationship for the things that they can't have. So instead of trying to cultivate more freedom or more excitement or more joy within their relationship, they just go, oh, this person is the reason why I can't have those things. Instead of talking to their partner about what some of their unmet needs are, they inherently figure you can't do that. You can't express your own needs. So you have to accept whatever is happening in the relationship, and then you can just fantasize about how good it's going to be once you're gone. And in many ways, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? So a lot of fearful avoidants, because they so deeply believe, because they often came from very enmeshed families where their needs were completely intertwined with someone else's needs and they weren't allowed to have boundaries. They believe it is bad for me to have boundaries. I'm a bad person if I try to set them. Therefore, they let everything go as soon as they're in a relationship. Like when they're alone, maybe they're really hard workers, or they're really disciplined with their diet and exercise routine, or they are really good at self-care. But then as soon as they get into a relationship, they might let those things go and allow this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy to take place where they believe that relationships make you worse off, weaker, less productive, whatever it is. And then that fuels their fantasy life where they're gone and they can do all of those things again. So if you are fearful avoidant and this is a pattern that you recognize yourself falling into, you have to do the work of proving yourself wrong. So if you are in a relationship, you have to do the same work that the avoidant style has to do of showing up and stating your boundaries and stating your needs and talking about what isn't going right for you. And where you can pull that awareness from is your fantasies. So in these fantasies where you have left the relationship, what are you doing? What is different? What are you feeling? Those fantasies are giving you a window into your unmet needs. And if you can find a way to bring those needs into the relationship and find a way to satisfy them without leaving, your entire worldview around relationships is going to start shifting. So I used to always tell myself that if I'm out of a relationship, I can be really disciplined with my health and my career, but as soon as I'm in a relationship, my partner, whoever that partner is, and it happened in multiple relationships, will derail all of those things. So what happened? As soon as I got into any relationship, completely unconsciously, I would start avoiding conflict of any sort by adapting myself to my partner's needs. My own needs would go out the window, and then one day I would look at my partner and go, oh my God, you're the reason why I have gained 10 pounds or fallen behind in my career or whatever it was. And I had to learn to be strict with myself within a partnership about attending to my health habits, attending to my work, letting my partner know how much space I need. And that's a hard one for fearful avoidance, right? We are avoidant types. We need a lot of alone time. But we often feel like we can't ask for it in relationships. So, as a fearful avoidant, in order to set proper boundaries, you have to start being willing to notice when you need alone time and to ask for it. You don't have to wait until you're out of a relationship to have some freaking alone time and some freedom, okay? You're supposed to have those things within a relationship. You just grew up in an enmeshed dynamic where that wasn't true. But as an adult, it's allowed to be true. You're allowed to spend lots of time with your friends. You're allowed to go on vacation by yourself. You are allowed to take a normal and healthy sense of independence from your partner. You just have to learn to be aware of when you need that and then to set that boundary. And this might show up as a challenge for you even if you're not in a relationship. So it might be your work that you need to set those boundaries with. It might be your friendships or your family relationships. But the idea is to do away with that dichotomy you have in your brain that tells you I can either be free on my own or I can be enmeshed and boundaryless around other people, and learn I can have relationships where I also have freedom and autonomy and independence. Or I can be alone romantically, but I can still have fulfilling, emotionally healthy and emotionally intimate friendships or family relationships or whatever it is. But what's going to be really, really important for you is just paying attention to your fantasies at every step of the way and noticing, even if the fantasy is ridiculous. Like, for example, I can't sing, okay? But I have fantasies where I am singing like Champagne Problems by Taylor Swift. None of you ever repeat this anywhere. This is so embarrassing. I have fantasies where I'm like singing Champagne Problems by Taylor Swift to a large, enthusiastic crowd, and they're all singing along with me. And it's like, okay, what is that fantasy, right? It seems ridiculous, but let's break it down. I am singing a sad song about my distress and other people are singing it with me. That is emotional mirroring, right? There's a part of me that feels distressed and sad and freaked out, and it wants to communicate that and have it mirrored back to me, okay? So now I know that I probably need that in one of my close relationships. There is something, some sort of pain or challenge I'm going through that I really, really want someone to see, recognize, and reflect back to me so that I feel less alone. So now I need to figure out which relationship is it that's feeling like that, and how can I communicate that need so that the real need gets fulfilled, not just through fantasy. And by the way, any type can do this. So all types have fantasies, some have more or less of them than others, but they are always telling you something about a need. You just have to pay attention to what is the feeling I get in this fantasy, okay? Not what's happening, but what am I feeling in it? Am I feeling seen and understood? Am I feeling free and independent and untethered? All of our fantasies are telling us something very important about an unfulfilled need. And if we can pay attention to that and then find a way to get that actual need fulfilled, it can revolutionize our life, okay? It can help us live in a completely different way. But first, we have to learn to take those feelings seriously, notice them, even if they're only showing up in our fantasies, and then do something about them in real life. And again, the same tools that are going to help the anxiously attached person and the avoidantly attached person for you as a fearful avoidant are going to come in handy. So you probably need to do some reparenting work. You probably could stand to use nonviolent communication tools to make your needs a little bit more apparent and known to other people. Both of those tools could be really, really big helps to you. But the important part is breaking down that dichotomy in your mind between being alone and being free to do whatever you want and being in a relationship and being trapped, okay? That does not need to be true. You can feel all things in either situation. And that's what it means to be secure, right? Secure people feel like within a relationship, they do not lose their sense of self. So they're comfortable within a relationship. And outside of a relationship, they also know who they are and what they want and what they love in life. So they feel comfortable on their own. And that's where each style needs to aim to end up, is in that secure place where they know who they are on their own, they know who they are in a relationship, and they can communicate their needs in either situation. So I think that for today, that's all I have to say about boundaries. There's obviously a lot more I could talk about on this topic. So if you guys have specific questions, I am very, very happy to expand on this series. Just let me know what you feel like would be helpful for you and where you're still struggling with this in your life. It's a really, really hard one. It is kind of the holy grail of attachment work, is figuring out how to set boundaries and how to live happily within those boundaries. And if you can get to a better place with this, it's going to be really huge in your healing. So let me know where you're at in this process, where you're aiming to get to. And as always, I love you guys, and I will see you again soon.